Good morning, everybody. This is a very special day. I'm Gert Olefs, the founder of World Peace 2035, and it's a special day because it's the kickoff of our weekly Facebook talks called Peace Talks. We have a very, very special guest today here with us. It's Scilla Elworthy. Scilla, thank you very much for granting us this interview.
Pleasure.
And we're here in Scotland together because you're going to lead a 3-day workshop around peace in action.
That's right.
And obtaining the skills to change the world. That's the topic of the Peace Talks. And so I'm very much looking forward to learn from you in the coming days. You have a remarkable career of 50 years in service of humankind and in service of peace, making the world a better place. I'm just going to take a very few highlights out of it, but you have been a 3-time nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, and congratulations for that. You've had also TED Talks, one of them which is now approaching 1.5 million viewers. You've written quite a number of books. You have also successfully founded and then started 2 NGOs. The Peace Direct was the second one, and Oxford Research Group is the first one. And so lastly but not least, which is a book that made a big impression on me, and I'm going to turn it to the camera because it's quite important that our viewers see, this is the Business Plan for Peace. It's a highly recommendable book if you want to learn more about peace, how to build peace on a national, on a local, national, international level, also looking at the cost elements of it and many other points. So for me, this was a missing link in my understanding of peace. So, and we'll get back to the book a little bit later. The first question, Scilla, for you is, you could have chosen many goals in life and good causes, but you chose peace. And not the environment or poverty or others. So why was that?
I think peace chose me because I didn't have much choice, in the sense that when I was as young as 13, I was watching a grainy old black and white television in my parents' living room, and I saw Soviet tanks rolling into Budapest, and kids not much older than me trying to stop them, and the tanks just rolled right over them, crushed them. And I was so upset, I rushed upstairs and started packing my suitcase. And my mum came in and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to Budapest." I didn't even know where Budapest was. And she said, "What for?" And I said, "Something terrible is happening there and I have to go." And she said, "Don't be so silly." And I started to cry. And bless her, she got it. She understood that this was so important to me.
Right.
And she said, "You're too young at 13 to be any use. You have to be trained, and if you'll just unpack your suitcase, I'll see that you get trained." And she did.
Okay, so it was peace that chose you. I think that's a very nice sentence. Now, I've also lived in 3 different continents, traveled the world a lot. I've heard everywhere people say we want peace, basically. And so my question has been, if everybody wants peace, why don't we have peace?
Because there are, well, for 2 reasons really. Mainly there are very large industries heavily invested in war, in the sense of providing the weapons of war, the strategies, and the motivation for war. So when I traced this back, when I was working on nuclear weapons in the early 80s, I gathered a research group, the Oxford Research Group, to find out how and why decisions were made on nuclear weapons, the most powerful of all. And that applies all the way through. And it came down to the people who design the weapons, the people who pay for the weapons, the ministries of defense, the people who provide the launching pad, the missiles, the aircraft, and so on, the intelligence people who provide the rationale, and last of all, the politicians who are, in quotes, approve it. But it's a whole massive industry worldwide that is geared to this idea that the way to solve problems is by force.
Right.
And that's too dangerous now.
Right. Well, one of the next questions that I had prepared, and maybe we can talk about it now. You are a very strong proponent of countering violent action with non-violent activity and action. Could you maybe give a few examples of what could be successful non-violent action? Because, for instance, in Sudan today, or in the last weeks, quite a few innocent demonstrators who were peacefully demonstrating have been shot and killed by the government and military. So how can you counter such type of violence with non-violence measures?
Our emphasis is always on prevention, and I weep for the demonstrators who get killed. It happened in Syria, it's happened in many instances, and it's the incredible courage of these people that brings the issue to the world stage, brings the issue to the world's media. But if we emphasize prevention, let me give you one example. Gulila Ismail is a young woman in northwest Pakistan. It's probably the most dangerous place in the world to be a woman. And she used to spend many, many years when she was 15 to 20 getting girls into school. Now what she does is to send and train young people to go into the religious schools, the madrasas, identify the young men being trained for jihad, go back with them to their families, talk to the parents about why the Quran would not approve of suicide bombing. And so far, these teams have prevented more than 200 suicide bombings. Now that is preventing huge destruction, all the people who would be blown up by those 200 bombs. It's just a brilliant example of how war can be prevented without force.
But prevention, you said, it's a key action.
Absolutely key.
And that's where also efforts and investments should go.
Exactly. We're doing a lot of work on investment into making, for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goal, number 16, making it investable. Right. Because currently it's not really.
Okay. So then, what would you consider to be 3 priorities to get to world peace? What would be the 3 things you would do if you were to be able to decide, we're going to go to world peace and this is what we're going to do?
Well, the first one is focusing our efforts on prevention. So we're beginning to work with some NATO nations, all of whom have very large defense budgets, and to persuade them, as already some countries are doing, to put their funding into prevention. Because soldiers and Air Force personnel are very good at working on prevention, but they have to have a budget in order to do it. So prevention is one. Getting that properly organized. Secondly, this question of dialogue. The work that we did on nuclear weapons was all done below the radar. So dialogue has to be bringing the people who actually make the decisions into the same room with their opposite numbers from the other side, to whom they have often never spoken, creating a safe enough environment, so no press, no communication, nothing, completely confidential, but open the dialogue that way. Because fundamentally, human beings are perfectly capable of understanding each other. It's when the armies are like that you can't do it. So prevention, dialogue, and then early intervention. That means you need a good early warning system that will tell you when a conflict is brewing in a place like Sudan or even Rwanda before the genocide, and you can then put all your forces, all your abilities, all your skills and capacities, like we're learning this weekend, into action in time to calm everything.
And that's probably where then the very local activities on the ground are so crucial.
Exactly. You've got it exactly. This is why my organization, Peace Direct, concentrates on locally led peace building initiatives. These are by far the most cost effective in the world.
Correct.
Very little money. They have very little money. And what they need is press coverage, because they need to be known about. It makes them safer. But also to be able to link their efforts up, so they're not just working in one small environment.
Okay. I thought you would probably put as priorities in there, one that you mentioned to me the first time we spoke in December last year, was the role of women.
Oh, well, that's the big one. It should be throughout everything, because as you know, I'll give you a very, very, very obvious example. When the United Nations did research on how many women sit around a peace table, they found in 2009 only 2.5% of those sitting negotiating were female. Result, the peace treaties only lasted for 5 years.
Right.
As soon as there are as many as 10% women around the table,
Right.
the lasting of the peace treaty is 15 years. And there's a very, very good reason for this. When warlords sit around a peace table, what they're bargaining, they're negotiating for territory, resources, power, money, and votes. When the women come, the women are bringing the fallout of war. They're saying, what about the orphans? What about the bereaved? What about the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder? What about all the grieving that hasn't been done around this conflict?
Okay.
Because that's the only way you can interfere with the cycle of violence. Otherwise it just goes round again.
Right.
So women are, in every instance, very well able to do this kind of work.
Okay. So that would be, let's say, included in those 3 priorities, a much more emphasis on the role of women.
Yes.
And much more involvement of women.
Yes, and progress is being made. I was amazed to find out that now, of all the countries in the world, 197 countries, 32 have female foreign ministers now. So this is progress.
This progress.
Most people, when you ask them, they think, 5 or 2 or something.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is quite a big step forward.
All right. You also attach great importance to building inner peace.
Yes.
Not just the outer peace, the inner peace. Could you maybe explain for our viewers a little bit about what you mean by that and the importance of inner peace?
Well, we find it in practice. This is a very practical issue. It's not just nice to have an inner power, but those who have dealt with their own fear and anger and negative emotions, when they've really looked at themselves, and it takes sometimes a long time to do it, those are the ones who, in the moment when an attack strikes, they can be present because they're not shaking with fright, and they can just make the right decision in the right moment. And that applies whether it's a knife fight in the street. If you're walking down the street in the dark and there's a knife fight, the first thing you may fear is I'm going to get hurt. But if you can quickly get over that and know how to intervene, how to talk to the people who are feeling very violent, how to listen to them even more. Listening is probably the biggest skill of what we call inner power. Yeah. And this is what we're going to be studying in the next few days.
And not an easy skill.
No.
I'm certainly guilty of not being a great active listener. Well, still a lot of improvement to be made there. But going back to this inner peace, I'm an EU citizen, and I'm the first generation that grew up in a prosperous and first of all peaceful region. So I come at peace from a more geopolitical, organizational structure standpoint. I kind of believe that we are all now here to think about inner peace and work on it because we have the outer peace. In Aleppo, Syria, Yemen, they don't have outer peace, so they are not concerned about the inner peace and they have to survive. So what's your view on that, the importance of outer peace for building inner peace?
Well, of course it's important, but even those who are in a very, very desperately aggressive situation like the bombings in Syria, the people who are called the white helmets there were able, because of their self-knowledge and inner peace, they were able to act, to be brave enough to come into a situation of a bombing and get people out from under the rubble, even though they knew that the Syrian Air Force was tasked to do something called double tap, drop bombs on those already trying to rescue. The bravery and the courage of these men and women is huge. So those skills of inner peace are not just, as I say, nice dreamy meditation or something. This is real strength. And when you see a woman or a man take their stand, and this is one thing we're going to learn this weekend, how to take a stand on something you believe in without immediately antagonizing the other person.
Okay.
How do you stand? How do you physically breathe? How do you stand so that you can put your point of view in a way that they can hear it?
Okay. Well, building on that, actually, the way I started World Peace 2035 was, in my mind, I come from the business world, and if you do not set yourself a very specific objective and you give it a timeline, you're kind of working in a dispersed manner. So we believe that world peace with a due date is something very important to us. So what would you say to that?
I feel you've done exactly the right first step. And 2035 is sort of, people can almost imagine that.
It's long enough and short enough.
Exactly.
Right.
I think you've got it right there. And it's great for people to have a target date to work towards, and then plot the steps that are necessary. And I'm sure you've done that.
Well, I'm in the process. It's kind of a hard process, in all honesty. I've learned a lot in those last 2 years, of course. The next step is actually where my advisory board of World Peace 2035 also helped a lot last December, and they said, what's the uniqueness of World Peace 2035? And our uniqueness was not only the due date, but it was also bringing people together. And that's something, so we are now in the process of establishing a World Peace 2035 alliance, bringing everybody together. We've just created a logo for it, and we want to go out. I wanted to learn here the next few days. And we want to go out and bring all the peace people together, because there are so many of them. And I mean, I just look at you, such a fantastic person. You have done tremendous work, but it's not communicated much about. It's not very well known. And you know, Laila has been working on the database, so we've put together a database of hundreds of organizations, all working around peace. And so we're going to communicate with them in the next few months and bring them together.
I love this.
Oh well, okay, I'm very pleased that this is
just right.
This is the next step. It's the alliance building, because we are people are working everywhere on peace, but a lot in their own silo.
Exactly.
In their own.
This is very numinous, because this morning I woke at 7 o'clock with this idea in my head: we have to have an alliance for peace building.
Well.
And did you know that they already have one in America?
Yeah, they have several alliances and coalitions, and so we've mapped them, and we know who they are and who's member and all that.
I'm delighted.
So, but that would be our next step. So you would feel like that's a good one?
I'll put you directly in touch with them, because I know them
great.
very well.
Okay. Well, and then Scilla, maybe to round off, because I think this is a very important question. A lot of people already came up to me when I speak, etc., and they say, what can I do? How can I help? And I think, what is your answer to that, to all those people out there who really want to help? A lot of people want to help, maybe many of them don't know how to help. What would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I ask them is, what breaks your heart?
Right.
Because once you locate what breaks your heart, whether it's wounded animals or refugee children, then there's the energy. That's where your energy is.
Right.
So I particularly say this to young people. What's breaking your heart? Because many young people are so depressed about the state of the world now. And second question is, what are your skills?
Right.
So are you good at crowdfunding? Are you good at social media? Are you good at getting a group of people to work together? Whatever your skill is, you match it to your passion.
Right.
And I guarantee that within a few weeks, you'll have a group around you, and you'll feel stronger and more able, and you'll map out with your friends what you're going to do. And for sure, in 5 years' time, you'll have an effective organization for change.
Right.
And I would encourage everybody who wants to bring change in the world to adopt a daily practice of self-reflection. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be Buddhism, it could be gardening, it could be walking in nature, but a daily gap in your electronic life where you go, what am I up to here? As if you could be on the balcony of your life, looking down and watching yourself, because then you will begin to observe where you're not true to yourself, where you're not actually at your most communicative and you could be more, or where you're maybe making a mistake. And my intuition, when I haven't followed my intuition in life, I've made my biggest mistakes. So there's a lot in this question of balancing the inner discipline of half an hour at least a day when you're quiet, when you're walking in nature, or by the sea, whatever, with your outer. And then you get the real power. That's power.
Okay. Well, everybody out there, this was golden advice from a very wise woman, and it's true, you know, this question when you mentioned when I first heard it, what breaks your heart, is a very powerful one, because that's where your passion is. And then match that with your skills, and you will really be on your way to making a very positive contribution to the world. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Scilla, for giving us this interview, and I look forward to the next 3 days.
Oh, well, it's been a great interview, Gert, and I'm thrilled what you said about Alliance, because that is so timely.
All right. Well, I feel great about that as well, because you never know whether that's the right direction, but
Oh, it is.
I felt it was.
It is, and we'll talk about it more because, and we can talk about how to do it. Because the skills that they have here in Finland and in Germany are honed over 40 years now of how to get people to work together, to listen to one another, and to build I think there's some way to go, but to build a powerful, cohesive alliance where people aren't jockeying for position. That's why the inner knowledge, which often makes us really look at our own lust for power. We all have it, and our own need to be the centerpiece and all that, and enables us to work more easily.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll be back next week with the next Peace Talk. Bye-bye.